We're thrilled that you've joined us today. My name is Vidya Nanthakrishnan, and I am the Managing Director of Catalyzed Justice. We launched Catalyzed Justice last year with two clear aims: to end the punishment and incarceration paradigm and to accelerate the creation of community-led supports that offer better outcomes for youth. This work is more critical than ever as regressive rhetoric and practices take hold that dismiss and deny decades of research, experience, and even the pervasiveness of systemic racism. To that end, our team is engaged in sites across the country that are helping youth flourish and thrive in their own homes and communities. These efforts are real-time demonstrations of what it takes to replace punishment and incarceration, rebalance the distribution of power and resources between systems and communities, and to establish and strengthen community-led supports in different contexts. Ultimately, we hope that lifting up these examples will begin to seed new narratives about how we truly achieve safety. Which brings us to today's launch of a new webinar series from Catalyzed Justice called Lessons from the Field. This occasional series will highlight the emerging stories of our different site partners, sharing a bird's eye view of how specific efforts have been developed and what it takes to implement that work. Along the way, we'll touch on how these efforts are operationalizing key values such as equity, community, and power sharing. With that, I'm really thrilled to be kicking things off today by featuring the work of our Milwaukee County partners. Today's panel, How Milwaukee County is Rethinking Reinvestment, will introduce the Youth Opportunity Community Grant Program, which includes some of its key elements and how it's evolved in the last few years. Before we dive in, I really want to thank and acknowledge our dedicated partners in Milwaukee County, including the Milwaukee Turners, the Children, Youth, and Family Services Division of the Health and Human Services Department, and the Public Welfare Foundation. Without all of you, none of this work would be possible. Just a few quick housekeeping notes for everyone who's in attendance. This session will be a closed panel, but we will be reserving time at the end for the panelists to answer questions. And our team will be monitoring the chat for questions, but we also encourage you to use the Q&A feature in your webinar control panel to submit questions at any time throughout the discussion. Lastly, we plan to record the event and we'll be sharing the recording afterwards. With that, I'm now going to turn it over to Vincent Lau, Senior Manager of Advising and Learning, who will be moderating our discussion today. Vincent currently leads and supports different site engagements around the country, including our work in Milwaukee. He previously worked at the Vera Institute of Justice and at the New York City Administration for Children's Services, where he worked on policy and practice reforms for detention, placement, and contracted community-based alternatives. Vincent is also a proud graduate of the Howard University School of Social Work. So with that, I'm going to turn you all over to Vincent. Vincent?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Vidya, and welcome, everyone. Again, my name is Vincent, and Vidya, I didn't realize you would do my bio too, so thank you, appreciate that. And definitely have to shout out HU for anyone who also went to Howard. Great, so I'm Vincent Lau, your game show host for today. Contestants, your buzzers are on your left. I'm kidding, I will stop there. I'm the Senior Manager of Advising and Learning, as Vidya mentioned. Here at Catalyzed Justice, I work in a few jurisdictions around the country. One of those places is Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Clearly, my favorite project since this very first webinar is about some of the amazing partners there from Cream City. And so, I wanted to take this time to give everyone here a warm welcome and also just prepare you for what I hope to be a really great conversation. I think there are some important things that we all can learn from what is happening in Milwaukee, but also acknowledging that the challenges that you all see in various places, can look very different too. And so, what are the commonalities that we can glean from this conversation is something that we want you to pay attention to. So before I introduce the panelists for today, I wanted to just take a quick poll from our audience to see where you all are hailing from. I think we're going to do a mini poll in this session right now. If you all can just take a few seconds to answer what city, county, or state are you joining from? I just wanted to get a sense of where folks are at. While today's webinar features work that is happening in the Midwest, there's really no doubt that there are parallels and similar opportunities unfolding in other parts of the country, right? So I think that's really what we want to convey to everyone here, like what information can be applied in your various places. So if folks can just type that in, we should see where people are from. And of course, thanks again for everyone for joining from your respective locations. So I think we can close that out and just see if the results pop up, I'll just name it right now. But if not, I will definitely chat that in a minute. Okay, great. So the panelists. Today we have some pretty awesome folks in our project in Milwaukee. And I really just wanted to highlight, their backgrounds a bit before we go into this discussion. So first, we have Chrissy Fung. She goes by she, they pronouns. Chrissy is the associate director at the Milwaukee Turners, the city's oldest social justice and civic nonprofit dedicated to strengthening the community based on the ideal of a sound mind in a sound body. Their guiding principles are liberty against all oppression, tolerance against all fanaticisms, reason against all superstition, and justice against all exploitation. Chrissy is the project manager for the Milwaukee Turner Zero Youth Corrections Initiative, which seeks to end youth incarceration in Milwaukee, something that you'll learn a little bit about in today's session. She also manages the Turner's Confronting Mass Incarceration team. Chrissy earned her BA in economics from NYU, was raised mostly in Santa Cruz, California. Chrissy is a non-binary Chinese person with roots in Hong Kong and Monago, Wisconsin. I hope I pronounced that correctly. In a previous life, they ran a 5,500 square foot geek-themed bar and restaurant in the greater Milwaukee area. Literally the best end of a bio that I've ever read. And so I felt compelled to read that part. Chrissy is dedicated to advocating for equity and justice in her community and is committed to a lifetime of learning and unlearning. Thank you for being here, Chrissy. Next, we have David Mohammed. David is the Deputy Director and Chief Operations Officer of Milwaukee County's Department of Health and Human Services, DHHS for short. DHHS is Milwaukee County's largest department with nearly $400 million budget, approximately 900 employees, serving 80,000 residents annually. David manages operations for DHHS service areas, including in disability services, behavioral health, housing, management services, and veteran services. And it's a county agency that also oversees how young people in the youth justice system are processed. He is a deeply committed community leader who has dedicated his career to improving the quality of life for families and young people in our communities. David continues to work to advance racial and health equity and is especially passionate about youth justice innovation strategies. And last but not least, we have Jed Oppenheim, who is from the Public Welfare Foundation. He joined Public Welfare in 2022 as its program director, leading the foundation's portfolios in Wisconsin, Michigan, Maryland, and DC. Prior to Public Welfare, he was a program officer with the Kellogg Foundation, their place-based office supporting communities throughout Mississippi and New Orleans, where he managed a portfolio supporting grassroots racial justice leaders focused on education, family, economic security, and food systems. Jed is an advocate with close to 15 years experience doing and supporting work in Mississippi and the Southeast, focused on ending the school-to-prison pipeline and supporting community-led transformation efforts around education and youth justice. He also served close to 4 years on the Jackson Public School District's Board of Trustees, serving over 25,000 students, their families, and educators, focusing on education equity and building authentic youth voice into decision-making. And And he also has amazing dad jokes. I really emphasize the word amazing. So, if you are so lucky today, you might get one or two. So again, thank you, Chrissy, David, and Jed for being here today and for sharing just a glimpse into what Milwaukee County has been working on over the last few years and continues to work on today. Also wanted to shout out members of the ZYC team who are not speaking today, Danique Seymour, Callie Pethke also. And I wanted to start this session with just some general framing questions, right? I think we have audience members from all over the country who are not really familiar yet with Milwaukee County and the Zero Youth Corrections work. And so, David, I think I wanted you to kind of kick us off. For those who are not familiar with what is happening now, right? Could you share some of the history of Zero Youth Corrections? Specifically, how did a small government surplus turn into this youth opportunity community grant? A funding stream with a mission, principles, and intention behind it.
So, and greetings to everybody, peace, and it's good to be in this space and be with you all this afternoon. I have to shout out somebody who I see on the attendees list, and that's someone who helped initiate this, and that was Mark Mertens, who at the time was the administrator of Youth and Family Services for DHHS. Myself, I came to the department in 2018. When I was a young person, I was heavily involved in the detention centers and whatnot, and that was a part of my personal experience, my personal transformation. And so my commitment to youth justice work was met with Mark's ideas regarding this. He was working real closely with Vinnie Schiraldi at the time and other folks in this kind of work. But so, in Wisconsin at that time, Act 185 was the legislation that was looking to close Lincoln Hills. And you see it on the screen here. And effectively, that move, because of abuses that were taking place there, young people not being educated, egregious acts of injury that were happening to youth as well as staff in that location, made it a public crisis that lawmakers were acting upon. And so at the time, there were a lot of advocacy work. A lot of advocacy work was happening in public forums about how to bring young people home, how to create alternatives to incarceration. And we were looking at our own work at Department of Health and Human Services and looking to see how we could reinvest youth AIDS funds to do more prevention-focused work. And we used some of those dollars to start our Credible Messenger program because of our investment in CVI, or Community Violence Intervention, and as well as launch this partnership with the Public Welfare Foundation to match a commitment of $200,000 with another $200,000. That number is not an accident. It at the time became the amount that it cost annually to incarcerate a young person in Lincoln Hills. And so the daily rate annually would come out to about $400,000 per youth sent to Lincoln Hills. That's important, even as it is symbolic, because there's a fiscal argument being made to send youth to prisons. It's happening with a lot of the construction companies, policymakers, et cetera, and not a public safety or an accountability one. And so for us, we wanted to say, well, what could we do with grassroots providers in helping to get public awareness around alternatives to incarceration and invest in people and not prisons. And so this became an opportunity for us to explore new ways of contracting, to do participatory budgeting. This was an attempt at participatory budgeting, not in its purest form, but to have 300 community members weigh in on the RFP award, have a steering committee led by community members, and to have youth who are presently incarcerated and formerly incarcerated, as well as their peer group in the community, weigh in on what would best serve their needs is a major win for us and has helped inform strategies since then in 2020 to now.
Thanks for that, David. And you're right. There was this recognition that, what are the community needs that exist in Milwaukee that should be funded, right? And so there was this effort to get the dollars out there. And so for folks who are, who have tuned in from the beginning or are tuning in now, the ZYC effort is this combination of county funds with a match from the Public Welfare Foundation to really target community efforts. And so I wanted to connect it to you now, Jed. How did this particular project initially draw in the Public Welfare Foundation? How does it continue to keep you involved? And what does this work mean to you and the organization?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Vincent. And also thank you, Catalyze Justice, for organizing this, and always grateful to be in a space also with my partners at the Milwaukee County DHHS and the Milwaukee Turners as well. Yeah, the Public Welfare Foundation, we work in 10 jurisdictions around the country, and we really, when we think about our work, we do not go into a community and dictate the kind of work that should happen and can happen. We spend a lot of time listening to partners. All of our work is around transformative justice to end the reliance on mass incarceration. So yes, we have a framework that focuses on that, and that's everything that we're moving towards. But we try not to go in and tell folks what should be done and by who. When the opportunity came to do this work in Milwaukee, it was really core to our values. The county, the community wanted to do something different with county dollars, and we jumped in. As a funder, we see ourselves as catalyzers. We don't have the dollars that city, county, state, federal government have. What our dollars are able to do is to help catalyze projects, ideas, work in order to really rethink youth justice in our places. And in Milwaukee, that's no different. And so when the partnership came to us to be able to do this work with the county and to think through with the county and through with the Milwaukee Turners about redistributing county dollars away from the carceral system, we were all in. The ability to be able to, like David said, talk with hundreds and hundreds of community members to provide input into how we would even spend those dollars, to be able to work with young folks who are contemporarily incarcerated in the detention center to get their input about how we should be using these dollars. It was powerful, and we weren't going to say no to that. And so I think when we are looking at our work and looking at what's going on in Milwaukee, it's completely aligned with our values in terms of centering the community to come up with transformative solutions around incarceration.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jed. And it gets us also to really think about how that emphasis on how do we sort of siphon away the funding at the tail end of the system, which is often the most, the very most expensive aspects of the youth justice system, and spend it on the front end, kind of falling in line with that very public health approach. So yeah, thanks for that. And then tying into you, Chrissy, so there, David and Jed kind of mentioned, right, there was that partnership between the county and then a foundation, philanthropy. And so how were the Milwaukee Turners pulled into this work? And what did this moment translate into for you? How did this particular partnership create room for a longstanding community-based organization like the Turners? And why was it important for the Turners to be present?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Vincent. I love telling this story because I think that when we think about how such a unique partnership like this evolves, it's always about coming back to the beginning and what were those original motivations and how have they played out? Because I think that the unique sort of triangle partnership that we have is absolutely core to how this program has been able to sustain a lot of challenges and some changes in the funding structure that we'll talk about a little bit later. But when Mark Martins and David Mohamed came to the Turners and they kind of presented this idea, I will say that I was extremely skeptical. I was like, okay, so the organization that's incarcerating our babies wants to work with us to incarcerate less babies. And at the time, as I think David mentioned, the original funding source of this was youth aid dollars. So in a way, I was like, they're defunding themselves to fund community organizations. How long can this possibly last? And how is that perverse incentive going to play out? Um, and they came to us with this prospect that was really experimental. It was not something that had been done before. And I think that it felt very risky. I think that it felt probably very risky to the county and to bureaucracy. But also, to be honest, it felt risky to the Turners. As you mentioned, Vincent, the Turners have a 171-year history of commitment to social justice. We were early abolitionists pre-Civil War. Today, that's translated into a deep commitment to confronting mass incarceration through all of our programming and our work. So we have this positionality as a historic institution, but we also, in the last couple of years, have been really undergoing a rebirth under new leadership with our new executive director, Emilio de Torre, that has kind of allowed us to rewrite or bring into this century a lot of these historic principles. And so it was really important to our historic principles and how those translate today, that we take the leap and be part of this. But at the same time, like I said, it was kind of scary. And we also have a lot of community ties and community trust that I think that we were genuinely concerned we would lose if we were working with system partners. And that needs to be done so carefully. So I often refer to it as walking a tightrope. And I'm going to get kind of meta with this, but I think that the key to the only way that this works is through trust. And I don't believe that that's institutional trust. I don't have a blanket trust for all of Milwaukee County. I have individual trust for the individuals like Mark, like David, like Denise that we've been working on this project through. And I think that remembering that each of us also has a role to play in the ecosystem and that we serve as avatars for our organizations. And for myself, understanding that as the representative of the Turners, I have to serve as an avatar of the community is really important because there certainly has been disagreement. There certainly have been bumps in the road. And so remembering that the ultimate goal is in the name, it's zero youth corrections. It's getting to that long-term goal of not having any young people incarcerated in Milwaukee County, and that's the most important thing, is absolutely key. And I think that if I'm talking to other individuals that are from organizations, whether that's system partners or community partners or funders that are considering doing this work, making sure that that the individuals within these institutions are willing to take that risk, but then also to follow it up with that rich trust building is absolutely so important.
For sure, for sure. I think there has to be this understanding that, taking risks is the easy part, but then having the trust to then back up the team to, really survive the really tough moments of the project is what's really necessary. And every time you tell that story, Christy, I think the things that resonate most with me is just, recognizing one, the Turners' placement within the community, as you said, being that avatar of community organizations that are out there, shows that you're willing to manage the tension that is inherently going to come up in doing this kind of work, right? When there is this combination of entities that are trying to work on a similar mission, there is bound to be disagreements and tension. And so how does a group like the Turners, really try to pull everyone in, hold each other accountable is really important. So that trust piece, but also the other piece about how, organizations, especially government agencies, right? They're essentially trying to shift funding away from the carceral side of things, right? They want to fund things in the community. That also shows that the county is acknowledging that they shouldn't be the ones doing the work that's needed. They're recognizing that, hey, there are folks out there who are in better positions They have the experience, they have the knowledge. How do we just get the resources to them to do the work, versus creating, another youth justice system that is, fully county run, that does all of the things that people have been asking for. So thank you for sharing those words, Chrissy. And so now for folks on the call, right? So we have this Zero Youth Corrections effort started out with the government, combining funds with the Public Welfare Foundation, and offering this as a resource to community groups doing the work with young people in the justice system, or those who are at risk of becoming justice system impacted. And so when you think about starting something like this, I think a lot of folks might want to know what the early goals and expectations are, right? So what are some core values or areas that were most important to all of you when you decided that this was going to be a real thing that needed to be developed and refined? If each of you could describe one of those core values and how it was manifested, how was it actualized, I think it would give our audience some real life examples of how the values are operationalized, and really how you're doing the thing that we all talk about, right? Like putting your money where your mouth is when you're talking about starting this. So maybe, yeah, David, you could kick us off on just
Sure.
on that.
Yeah, I would just say that we saw this as a way to diversify and expand our provider network and to bring people into the fold who had not been necessarily doing the work at this level. So it's a capacity building opportunity, both for individuals who are providers in the community, but as well for us. So if we can center the needs of agencies and individuals who are doing the work in the community, and what can we learn about our own system that we need to change. So immediately, issues like insurance, the forms that we were using for some of our contracting pieces, the way that we do RFPs. This was a lesson in how to throw some of the bureaucratic structures out of the window, and then see what was really needed for us to support entities that are doing this work. So that was one major component that I wanted to see in its infancy state, that we would be learning as well as partnering with the agencies. And then when the awards happened, the types of agencies that were coming to the table, I'm using the word agencies, but some of these were just programs or projects or individuals who had things going on in the community that were impactful. And like we stated at the beginning, if the cost to incarcerate one who's not getting any education, who's in an environment that's hostile 4 hours away from Milwaukee, is justified by the actual building itself of a prison, then what does it look like in terms of our tolerance level for risk and learning and patience with a community partner that has the ability to leverage their relationship with those youth to influence behavior? So the original grantees were Paradigm Shift, Your Move MKE, and those were two very different organizations who, at different levels, one was run by at least 80% of the folks involved were formerly incarcerated persons, and then Your Move MKE were doing the work in community using hip hop culture, etc. What happened in that process was a commitment to being patient, trying to work through our processes. And then when the funding became shifted from youth aids to ARPA, that's when things got a little bit more difficult. But we've maintained the partnership and learned from that, as well as kind of work through some of those things, and being a self-reflecting institution, being able to take the criticism when the contracting process creates stress and is difficult. So just those are some of the major things that we got out of it.
Yeah, thanks, David. Chrissy and Jed, some of the values and how those core values kind of manifested into the work of Zero Youth Corrections.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So another kind of early core values that we set up. And I'll back up and say that I think, as I said in the beginning, like commitment to and returning to the core values every time that we are hitting these bumps in the road has been super important. And so I'm excited to be able to talk about this because I think that there were many times when, as David mentioned, just issues, bureaucratic red tape issues with the change in funding source would come up. And there are a lot of little pieces to this puzzle that I think folks don't often get the opportunity to see. And so being able to pull back the curtain a little bit and then return to those original values is super important. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about our values of innovation and engagement. So when we were first coming together, we talked a lot about how this was a big experiment. And that was actually something that built trust from the Turner side towards the county. The fact that they were acknowledging out loud that this was something new and inherent in the idea of an experiment, that there were going to be things that would be problems or need to be worked through, and that they had come to the table and were committing to work through those things with us. Um, and like I said, this was something that was new for each of our organizations and something new for Milwaukee in general. But one thing that I always say when we talk about this is that one of our original principles, we said boldness, take risks. But we all know that the real risk is in the status quo. It's in continuing to incarcerate and have punishment focused consequences for young people, because we know that that has disastrous ripple effects for the entire community. Um, and so, in talking about innovation, that was both from a funding side. So this was a unique funding source. One of our major goals was to get the dollars to the folks doing the work with minimal red tape. A piece of that was reducing restrictions on the funding itself. So there's a lot of grants where you can't spend money on food, you can't spend money on transportation, et cetera. Um, and so, although this funding isn't entirely unrestricted, making it as unrestricted as possible, I think was super important. Um, David mentioned the two round one grantees, and they were actually able to get a physical space partially with these dollars, which I think is an incredible testament to the impact that this small drop in the bucket of money had, because now there is a physical space that you can go to where there's a rich tapestry of organizations working on youth issues and justice reform issues in Milwaukee. And the Turners actually have an office there. And so, in the way that this funding has been less restrictive, we've also seen some beautiful things blossom that I think that you may not see with more restricted funding sources. And then the other side of that was also just to make the application process and the reporting process also have as little red tape or hoops to jump through as possible. So that's kind of the innovation and doing something new from the funding side. And then from the applicant side, we were also looking for folks who maybe have been doing direct service for decades to take these dollars and take this opportunity to imagine something that would maybe focus more on the systems change piece. And I think Jed is going to talk about that a little bit later. But to talk about engagement, too, one of the things that I think I'm really proud of that we've done with this program is really focus on getting community engagement at the front end to help define the values that went into the RFP and that also went into the selection of the grantees. And so we had a lot of community forums in both round one and round two prior to selecting the grantees. We asked folks what kinds of solutions that they think would make a difference in Milwaukee and would shift our focus from punishment based reactionary reactions to young people making mistakes or doing stuff that young people do, and focus towards positive change. And so as part of that, we were able to do in the second round, we had a youth-led forum where young people, as part of a youth advisory board, designed the questions. They invited folks in their community, and then they also moderated their own forum. And then we took those questions also into Bell Phillips Detention Center, which I think is a really key part of the engagement piece of the work that we do. And we've been able to do that for both rounds, where we're directly going and talking to the people that we're talking about, and we're able to explain the program to them, but also then just hear their feedback on what is needed and what might change things. And I will say that that is probably my personal favorite part of this program, beyond seeing the impact that the grantees are able to make, is just talking to the kids in Bell Phillips, who are smart and kind and funny and remind me a lot of myself. And so with that, I think I'll let Jed talk a little bit more about kind of the systems change piece when it comes to our values.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. And Jed, I'm going to turn to you in a quick second. I just want to do sort of a quick recap for our audience, right? So some of the values and how they put it into action that we've heard so far, right? Is just like recognizing that when the county or the government is doing something, especially when it comes to getting resources out to community groups, especially those who have not previously accessed resources, recognizing that there are a ton of obstacles there, right? And so like actually mapping out those challenges that folks have, and then doing the opposite of what it currently exists in typical procurement or contracting practices. So, what David mentioned was throwing those bureaucratic obstacles out, right? And then what Christy highlighted was just the authentic engagement, right? I think, one of the challenges that we often feel in this field is that, especially folks who are on the ground and the community-based organizations, they have talked at length about what they need, right? And so actually turning some of that feedback into something that you're going to put down in your RFP, in what you're trying to award, being really intentional about that is something that has to happen as well, right? It's not just reaching out to folks for the sake of reaching out, and not just listening about the things that we should know about, but how do we turn it into something that's going to start addressing that folks have been talking about for years and decades. So yeah, and then I'll turn it to you, Jed, to just speak on some of the your take on the values and what has come out of this.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. I think kind of like Chrissy alluded to, we as a foundation, we do not do a lot of supporting of direct services. At the same time, we know that systems are relatively not good at being nimble and shifting on a dime when it comes to issues that they're often responsible for cleaning up, taking care of, et cetera. And so our participation, our ongoing participation in this has been a lot about, I would say, being a translator of what it really means to look at how do you take direct services as what folks are rightly doing because there is a crisis in community, taking their knowledge and shifting that into how do we actually change the system in which that creates the necessity for the services that we're talking about. One of the not so subtle things that I think talk about sometimes is that this is very much an underhanded way to reduce the leverage and the power of the county and other systems, really, by learning and unlearning what it is that's incarcerating young people, but also holding the keys to the cages, right? We are both at the table with the county while also building, hopefully, and supporting a fleet of community-based organizations and individuals, but at the same time trying to shift that power away from the county. And so I think there's something really powerful to say about that. Our role is oftentimes trying to be a buffer as a national funder working in a very specific place. We can both leverage that outsider role and also push our insider connections, right? We happen to also be a funder of the Milwaukee Turners, and up until recently, we were a separate funder of the county as well. And there's ways that we could utilize all of these power dynamics in order to create, hopefully, what the best opportunity is to keep young people out of the system. And oftentimes that means being a translator. Chrissy talked about trying to reduce the red tape. Like sometimes we're able to come in and work within this partnership and say, you know what, well, how do we help the Turners resolve this so that then the community-based partners don't have to deal with this? How do I go back or how do I work with the county on, well, you know, here's what happens in some other community around the country that they've done to problem solve this issue of whether it's like contracting issue or what we do when we shift funds from one stream to another. So we are often playing this role of translator as we think about how to shift more resources away from the system itself, while also being respectful partners of that system.
And I just would have to add, you know, these are the taxpayers' resources. They belong to the community.
These are the people's dollars.
Right, right. So it's I would say it's much more about how these dollars should flow and how we should be thoughtful about what it is we're trying to accomplish. What we're trying to accomplish is create responsive, ways to approach the types of issues and problems that a young person would find themselves in the criminal legal system with, in addition to looking at the role that the county is playing. Oftentimes when you see the youth justice system, we're at the tail end of a court process, but there is some influence there. And we have had with this process the need to talk with judges, the way at least one of the projects was designed. We've had the need to talk to the comptroller and explain what is participatory budgeting. And inherent in that is some power sharing, as Jed alluded to. That's very different than just having listening sessions and saying, trust us and we'll come back with something that you all will like. In addition to that, just an RFP process, which is not necessarily the most public thing, making it a public type of approach is a big deal for us, but as well for our partners. But there's another piece to this too, which is that the community, having been shut out from a lot of these conversations, there's also a need to walk alongside them as well. And oftentimes when we have advocates and activists, we tend to look at some of the biggest targets that are in front of our face and miss policymakers and miss other institutions that might really have the levers to the issues that we're trying to organize around. And so for the community, it's just as much of a major opportunity for them to gain a greater knowledge of how the youth justice system works and how the youth justice system is not working.
Right. Right. Thanks for that addition, David. And I think that's a point that resonates, at least with me, deeply, right? Like just if the value is how do we shift away from systems, right? There has to be acknowledgement of the power dynamics that currently exist, no matter the jurisdiction you're from, right? Like how do we, as you mentioned, the people's dollars are being spent, but not according to the people, not even the general public, much less those most impacted by the work. And so how do we open up those spaces again? How do we, as Jed mentioned, be the translator of the work that is happening, the work that they want to be doing, unlearning the current dangers of the status quo, of like how we're operating in the youth justice space now. How are things funded? How are they unfairly funded now? So thank you all for sharing those values and some of the ways that it's been operationalized. I think the next thing I wanted to turn to, you all sort of did talk about the collaboration piece, right? The trust that's required to do this kind of work. If you could just quickly, I think maybe in about a minute or so, just speak to how you really can't do this work alone, right? So public welfare can't just come into Milwaukee and fund X, Y, and Z and expect the results that we have today and see what we have today, right? And the Turners can't be the ones galvanizing everyone without firm commitment and financial support from the county, and foundation, right? So, what are some things that really highlights to you all the mutual accountability and trust pieces? How do you move this work forward? So the question is, what is the magical glue or the secret sauce in this kind of collaboration?
But if I could dive in just on that one, I want to talk about why Milwaukee Turners
Yeah.
was sought after. I mean, Chrissy talked about it, in the beginning, but the Turners in Milwaukee right now is a honest conversation broker between advocates, between other social issues. You see them speaking on mass incarceration on the adult side, and then they hold space for a lot of accountability and truth telling with other system partners in a way that doesn't compromise their integrity. For us, that was critical. It puts them in the position of arbiters of public trust. And so for us, having somebody like that who will also push back on us, who will also tell us when we're not working in alignment with the principles and where the system is getting in the way of the intention, is a very valuable dynamic. And it assumes best intention of the individuals involved. And I appreciate what Chrissy said, because systems inherently protect themselves and their interests. That's how they're designed. There's nobody who is doing this work as a public servant who should forget the fact that they are a part of the community, and that's who should hold them accountable. And so that's something that is built into this partnership, that there's checks and balances between us and what's expected of the partners, but really what's the purpose for the partnership.
Yeah, thanks for that, David. Jed and Chrissy, any additions to that? Just some of the collaboration pieces that are high on your mind? Okay. No, I feel like David did sum it up pretty well there. And you all did mention the trust piece, and just how each of you are coming from your various perspectives are able to hold each other accountable and not compromise the mission that you all are connected on. And I wanted to turn next to, okay, so we kind of walked the audience through what is ZYC, how did that start? What does that look like now? Some of the early goals and expectations, and how do you actually build it from intention to values to then actualization, or how do you make it concrete, right? So has it all been good and dandy? What have been some of the toughest parts of this work? I think folks oftentimes want to know the challenges that have gotten you to question a thing or two. Yeah, system folks might be on the line, funders, other intermediary nonprofits that are watching. What are some real challenges that they have to be aware of?
I could jump in. I have like a whole gaggle of a list, but I'll try to just highlight one or two real quickly, because I think there's some nuts and bolts stuff. Chrissy alluded to the switch from the youth aid fund. I think David did too, to ARPA, which is, was definitely a big shift in terms of how we were figuring out how to work together. But I think generally, right, what we're seeing in Milwaukee is not different from probably almost any other jurisdiction right now in terms of the racist, tough on crime, super predator mythology. It's very clear in Milwaukee by Milwaukee leaders, by partners, by community folks in Milwaukee who might not be aligned around decarcerative approaches to young people. And so we've had a real struggle with narrative in Milwaukee County in terms of how to push back. And so I think that that's something that we're grappling with in our third round of funding. We're going to be much more deliberate about how do we build in some funds specifically around communications and narrative. How do we write our own stories for the young, with the young people who are most impacted? I don't think their voices are ever really given the same kind of weight as political leaders or as agency leaders or chiefs and sheriffs of police and those kind of departments. I think that that's been a huge issues because we hear, oh, nothing's being done about, you know, young people and crime and all this kind of stuff. And here we have all these amazing partners who are struggling day in and day out to make sure that we have safe communities where our young people thrive. I think also, like, fundamentally, when we have such an ambitious idea of getting down to zero youth incarceration, our dollars are just a drop in the bucket. David talked about how initially it was what it cost one child to be incarcerated for 1 year at Lincoln Hills, right? That's one child, and we got many children who end up there because of failures in other systems, right? And so when we talk about zero youth corrections, and we're talking about what our dollars could do, it's like, how do we translate that to how do we catalyze this relatively small idea of idealistic organizations, entities, and people into something much larger than just what those dollars entail? And so I think that's the direction that we're going in the third round of our work that's just getting started. And then I think the other thing that Chrissy alluded to and David alluded to is this kind of shift from like direct services to systems change. So even though we put in a process where we were trying to be as explicit with folks that what we learned from the community, we wanted to translate into what are clear policy advocacy, et cetera, things through public education awareness that we could do to actually shift how the county and how other entities work with young people, handle issues when they arise. And that's been a real struggle to communicate. And so we are being iterative there as well into the third round. And I'll stop there, even though I have like 5 more bullets.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Jed.
if I could just jump in too on one of Jed's points about the systems change piece. I think that was a really surprising challenge for us. I think originally I thought if we just say like, hey, like, be wild, use your imagination, that was going to be opening the floodgates of all these kind of non-system, non-punishment solutions. And I think that what we've seen is, and David said this too, like, the system is really designed to perpetuate itself and to create tunnel vision so that you can't see outside of the world that we think we have right now. And even in our visits to the young people in Bell Phillips, there are a lot of kids in there that will say, if we say, what would help prevent you from coming back? They will say, nothing will prevent it. I'm just going to keep coming back here over and over again until I'm an adult. And that's really heart-wrenching. But I think that that also speaks to the fact that the system that we have now is a big imagination killer. And so trying to figure out, like how Jed said, to be iterative and to give folks the resources and the space and to ask the right questions in order to help all of us as a community be more imaginative is super important. And in our positionality as the community partner, you know, I've said during times of conflict with the county where we were kind of having discussions about rules and red tape, you know, it's our job as a community partner to say, you know, humans made these rules, so we don't have to be stuck with these rules forever. Now, the rules weren't made by the people that are sitting in the room with us, yes. And we may lose this fight in the short term, but I think it's really important to have that long-term vision and that long-term goal always, and to be willing to lose a lot of battles along the way, and still maintain the faith that in the end, we're going to get there. In the end, we're going to get to zero youth corrections.
And I would just say that, you know, a lot of this, there's a backdrop of people saying, well, why are you spending the resources this way? And they'll question the value of this type of investment. And, you know, you just have to push back and say, well, look at the outcomes of what you have spent it on, and look at the rates of what you care to measure for those types of systems. I'll also say, in terms of pain points and difficulty, you know, in this process, people have great ideas. As was stated earlier, pairing it with a critical analysis of systems is really important. Sometimes though this is not political work, all work that's transformative is inherently political at some level. And you have to have an analysis. And for some of our partners, there was a lot of just, I'll call it, I'll use a euphemism, being system adjacent or law enforcement friendly, and we wanted to do things that were not harmful and not traumatizing in that way, or that would advance or kind of strengthen a punishment lens on the work. That was very intentional. And for many providers, just like was stated, they couldn't think outside of that reality that we experience in community. And that's part of the problem, that accountability does not always have to come from a way that is punitive and expensive and has negative, harmful, longstanding effects on the individual, so that when they return home, yes, somebody was held accountable, and there's still a harmed person back in the community who's unhealed. So things that we had to think about in collaboration with partners, as well as with the intention of this project.
Right. And thanks for elevating that, David. And Jed and Chrissy, I feel like you both definitely strategize in creating that easy segue to the next question for me. As a facilitator, I fully appreciate that, because the next question would have been about the evolution of the grant itself, right? So like, you folks in Milwaukee end up creating this RFP and this grant that then goes out to community, groups, nonprofits, that they have to respond to. It's an RFP that has taken, considerable feedback, right, from community members and the groups in various community forums and information sessions that you all did, visiting the detention center and speaking to young people. The question was going to be about how the grant has evolved, right? And Jen kind of alluded to that, right? The systems change piece of not only wanting to fund direct service, folks who are working individually with people out there in the community, but how do we then get them to think about what does shared advocacy look like? How do we target specific buckets of funds that are available at the county level? What kind of organizing has to exist amongst folks who are in the youth justice space? So I think the question, again, just to re-raise it, right? It has evolved since the first year. It's currently in its third iteration. But why did it need to change? And where is it now? So, each of you have briefly spoke about the need to change it, and to have it be a constantly evolving resource, right? One that constantly acknowledges feedback from the community, one that constantly revisits the values and intentions that started this effort. But I just wanted to offer up this space to any of you to speak on that piece. And I think Chrissy, if there are no other thoughts on this, I also did want to hear about what that third round currently looks like, and your thoughts on the community table piece.
Can I jump in on the
yeah, go ahead,
on the evolution piece before getting into the third round? I think it's really important to, I don't know if it's overscore or underscore that the commitment and the time commitment. You look at that timeline. Yes, we made our first grant in 2022, but the work did not start in 2022. It preceded that, and both government and private foundations, public foundations too, are notoriously bad at committing to something long term, right? And so as we go into round three, we're going to be in this until at least the end of 2026. And that's 5 years of this deep community-based partnership that brings an abolitionist community-based organization that will be there longer than any of us will as a private foundation, as players in government roles and agency roles. And that is not something that's typical, I think, in a lot of partnerships, collaborations, et cetera, because funders are often looking for the the shiniest thing on the shelf to show easy, quick wins. And this is not an easy, quick win. Government are usually doing year to year to year. We need outputs. We need to show jobs created. We needed to show, you know, all the other numbers, people served in the health department or in the other social safety nets that kind of extract the actual long-term outcomes. And so I can't underscore enough the fact that this has been a long-term commitment. And if you're thinking about it, if you're thinking about, oh, how would this look like in my community? You got to really think about this as long-term work. It is iterative work, and it is going to iterate into round 3. And I'll stop there.
Great. Thanks, Jed.
Thank you, Jed. And I think that one of the really exciting pieces that's coming out in the evolution of this program that I don't think we ever could have imagined at the beginning is we do have a doubling of funding for round 3. So it's a total investment of $800,000. $400,000 of that remains with the RFP process, which is currently open. But then the other $400,000 is going towards the building of a community table that's going to be focused on reimagining youth justice, where we hope to convene 10 to 15 organizations, folks that are already working with young people that are working on youth justice and other justice issues in the Milwaukee area, and bring folks together to kind of address some of what we were talking about as a challenge, which is that if you don't have a concrete space for folks to come together and be imaginative about what the future of youth justice and accountability can look like, it's really hard to pick your head up from the day-to-day grind of doing that direct service, of just taking care of the immediate people and the immediate fires in front of you. And so with this, we hope to bring folks together to break down some of the silos that a lot of folks in Milwaukee say, oh, everyone in Milwaukee is working in silos. And I think it's become almost a trope where in any space like this that you enter in Milwaukee, people will bring that up. And I think that they've been saying that for definitely the entire 10 years I've lived in Milwaukee and probably longer. And so a piece of that is bringing folks together out of the silos, bringing folks together to be able to work in coalition. And another piece of that is to be gathering us together to be able to do some trainings in terms of capacity building, in terms of narrative. How do we talk about the real issues that are happening for young people, but talk about them in a way that is productive and is focused on accountability rather than punishment. So I think that that's a really exciting evolution of this work, and that's going to run in parallel to the RFP funding. So the organizations that are selected as a part of round 3 RFP process will be seated at that table, as well as others. And I'm hoping that this is a really beautiful place that we can bring folks together who are committed to changing the landscape of youth justice in Milwaukee.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Chrissy. And that definitely is one of the more exciting pieces of this, right? So for our viewers, you know, the funding has doubled. It has literally doubled. And there is now this recognition that, you know, aside from getting folks to think more about systems change and beyond direct service, like actually creating a space where folks are paid to be there to discuss strategies, organizing, you know, all of the pieces that are necessary to achieve that systems change piece. So yeah, definitely one of the best pieces. David, go ahead.
Vincent, I just want to tag real quick on that. So the irony is, as this is doubling, the initial cost to incarcerate a young person is doubling as well. So what was 460,000 a year is now becoming 800-some thousand a year. And the justification that is being used for that is that the numbers of young people sent into corrections is going down so much that the cost to incarcerate the few that are there has to be justified to keep a place like that open. So again, the public discourse on what is needed to, yes, hold young people accountable, but yes, build up young people in spaces and in communities so that they don't have to return to a carceral setting, and then make an environment that people can thrive in so that it prevents the types of things that cause people to get in trouble to begin with, is the bigger public policy discussion that needs to be had, that this represents.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Thank you for really highlighting that sobering point too, David. That, if folks missed it, it is now about $800,000 a year to incarcerate a young person. And one thing that doesn't take too much effort to imagine is what we all could be doing, what families and young people could be doing, if such an amount of resources were invested in them, right? So definitely great backdrop, sense of raising the sense of urgency for all of us in this space. So now I wanted to just give you all kind of time for a last word here, and really let some of the folks absorb the great words of wisdoms that have been espoused today, right? So acknowledging that there might be folks from other places, other jurisdictions sitting on this webinar who have a chance at really reinvesting system dollars differently, or they're about to embark on some serious brainstorming, strategic planning, and how they can reinvest in the community. And what are some last words that you might want to highlight to folks who are on the precipice of doing this work or really want to do something similar? What is something you want to share with them?
I'll go first since nobody's saying nothing. I would say a commitment to public service means transparency. It means accountability. It means coming in with principles, and moving from a space of a commitment to justice. And so while a lot of the conversation has been about the system, we need to envision different systems that are not creating the harm and then replicating the harm and then feeding and funding themselves from the harm. And so whenever opportunity presents itself for that to happen and become, as we're talking about, catalyzing justice, then that should be seized upon, and it should not be status quo from individuals who are just trying to hold a seat and stay as status quo, leaders. So anyone thinking about it, if you're in a municipal government, if you're in some type of system role, know that you must act and move as a change agent.
Definitely. Jed, Chrissy?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, for funders, since that's the chair I currently occupy, I mean, this is what your money is supposed to be for, are these kind of opportunities to catalyze and to use your privilege and influence to get folks to the table, to get them to stay at the table, use your voice and your kind of seat to make sure that it's an equitable approach, that you're centering the communities most impacted. That's the whole role of the funder in these circumstances. And you also have the unique role, we've talked about it, being both a buffer and a translator between systems and communities, because often both are looking to you for your input, your insight, obviously your dollars. And so use that and understand your own privilege at this point. Be a convener, be a convener, not a convener, whatever that word was that I just said. And long-term commitment, like I said it when the when the timeline was up there. This is not overnight work. This is not easy work. You have to stay and you have to stay committed. And you also have to be responsive to community. It's not you as an individual, as a funder's ego or personality driving things forward. It's being really responsive to the partners at the table.
Yeah, I think from the perspective of the community organization, there's an incredible emotional weight that comes with knowing that at the table, we, and sometimes in a room, just I am supposed to represent the entire Milwaukee community somehow. But there's also an incredible lightness in knowing that each of us are just ants in the march towards zero youth corrections. And so this is a small amount of money that we're able to do something different with, and that we're able to get out into the community to folks who are trying to do something different. But the hope is that there is a rich ecosystem and tapestry of experiments and of different ways of thinking about youth justice. And like Jed said, I really think that you have to have no ego in this work. I usually say, I think I lose like 90% of the fights that I've had in this work. And you just have to keep going, and know that each of us are here because we are committed to zero youth incarceration. And to go back to kind of what I said in the beginning about that trust piece, I think that looking for, I guess, a la the Mr. Rogers, look for the helpers. I had a lot of skepticism in working with people who are in the system, but there are Marks and Davids and Daniques in every system. There are people that will know their positionality and leverage it to work towards the right thing. And so you have to find those people and build that trust with them, if you're going to do something like this.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you all for sharing those really important points. And I think for the viewers who missed it, you should have been paying attention. No, I'm kidding again. It's going to be in the recording. But also, the fact that, Jed, Christy, and David have these last words that kind of offer insight into the type of relationships that you need to have, the trust and just the communication piece amongst the three entities to really carry this forward is really key, right? And so that is something that I've always heard, in our work with the ZYC team in this conversation today, just how important that communication piece is. So thank you all again for those last thoughts on the potential, the folks who are here who also want to be doing this work. At this point, your questions are over. At least the ones that I've meticulously curated for you all over weeks and weeks. But I did want to take a few questions that have come in from the Q&A also. So from some of the audience members who, thank you for writing in some of the questions. The ones that kind of come up top of mind for me, and it's something that we all have discussed in our occasional ZYC check-ins too, is, a lot of folks often want to know the outcomes right off the bat. I think it's sort of that inherent gut reaction that a lot of people have, system outsiders, everyone really who sees something new happening. What are the outcomes? What metrics are you using? What are the main goals you want to achieve? So acknowledging that it's not going to be fast, it's not going to be quick. What are your thoughts on just how one can prepare folks who are not part of the day-to-day work? How do we get folks to focus in on the truly important outcomes versus the more minute, like how many kids have come back into the system? What are the outcomes that we should even be paying attention to? So that's one aspect of the question. And secondly, like, how do you know that it's a long-term thing? How do you kind of break people away from just knowing, after the grant period has ended, well, can you show me some numbers? Can you show me that this thing has quote unquote worked? What are some of your thoughts on the outcome piece of it?
So I on that one, let's put the numbers in context with the investment. For a couple $100,000, you're not gonna solve the problem. All right, you're gonna serve a focused amount of youth, but you're not going to, one investment of a couple $100,000 is not going to drastically reduce recidivism. Now, a couple million, you can see some dents in that, and Milwaukee County has done that. This was not the only thing that we invested in. We invested in our Credible Messenger program. We invested in girls programming. We invested in some workforce development stuff. This was a part of an ecosystem for us. But for the awardees of ZYC, the collaboration that was mentioned earlier was an organic, holistic outcome that wouldn't have shown up on a report except anecdotally. That two organizations came together with a singular purpose, found a location in the community, found an entity that was running that location that is actually run by formerly incarcerated persons. And it's right in the middle of a neighborhood where there's need. That's one win. Another one is the work that I have seen from Your Move MKE touches a lot of young people. Paradigm Shift focuses on a very focused, high-risk individual. And the higher the risk, and I'm using this kind of criminal legal language, but young people who are involved in some serious charges, to really make an impact with them, you have to have a higher level of investment. And the deeper the investment is where you see the outcome. So it is a smaller number of youth. But the greatest thing that we see with this is not this hurry up and get a quick turnaround outcome. It is build a cadre of leadership and agencies that are willing to take on the big issue in an intelligent way, not a reactionary way, or not a way that feeds a narrative that reinforces criminal legal approaches to addressing the needs of young people.
What I would add around outcomes is something I think we kind of come back to quite a bit when we might go down some rabbit holes of philosophy and whatnot, is that it's literally in the title of what we're doing, right? Zero youth corrections. So like if we're not thinking about every decision we're making as a collaborative or as partners around that, then we're getting off our target in terms of what the ultimate outcome is of this. Now, a lot of that outcome is going to come from what David talked about, is this kind of organic creation of partnerships, leadership, new ideas, et cetera, in order to get to our ultimate goal, which, yes, our $400,000 or $800,000 won't do it alone, but it's going to be able to seed these ideas, and it's going to be able to seed these kind of partnerships in terms of where we're heading.
Yeah, thank you both for the response on that. I think one thing that I often think about too is the expectation of new and innovative programs to do the impossible with a very small amount of money, right? And how that's constantly juxtaposed with how the current youth justice system isn't held to the same standard and continues to produce a lot of the disparity, trauma, and really negative outcomes that we see, right? And so definitely wanted to reframe that question of like, well, why is that intense focus on those metrics that are, that folks often ask, why are we holding community groups to an even higher standard? So yeah, definitely thank you for that. I'm going to take one more question about just really sustainability, sort of related to sustainability and long-term commitment of something like this, right? I think, Jed, you've mentioned this a few times, right? That if funders are coming into this kind of work, this is a long-term commitment. It's not going to be, a quick release of funds and then you're gone, and this work continues on its own. But how is the county and how are you all, but I think especially the county, thinking about long-term commitment to this kind of grant program? I think you all kind of referenced the switching of government and county funds used for this, but what kind of messaging has been helpful in really building allyship or getting other folks to understand and see the value in something like this?
So I'll make it as brief as possible. This was our first re-granting effort in terms of this type of partnership with private philanthropy. We've done it a couple times since then. We did it through the pandemic, and we're doing it now with opioid settlement dollars to try and stop overdose deaths as a department. But it came from this partnership that taught us lessons. The second thing is we're looking at other funds, whether it's through youth aids or whether it's through tax levy or through other philanthropic dollars that can support innovation. It's philanthropy that allows for us to do the types of things that innovate and instruct, that do system change efforts. And then lastly, we're looking at how this type of work really is the type of behavioral health work that should have access to other funds, not just youth aids dollars that are tied to the number of young people incarcerated. So what could be Medicaid reimbursable through comprehensive community services? What could be leveraged with other types of health services dollars from the state? And then how do we pair that with philanthropic support? Because it's true, and one of the frustrations we have with philanthropy is the shiny new thing is often not as well-informed, well-intentioned, or well, it's well-intentioned, but not as well-informed as it could be to make lasting change and really make a difference. But it looks good on a press release. We want to make improved outcomes, and how can we pair those types of funds? So that's something that we're looking at critically and have moved towards.
Yeah. Thanks for that, David. I wanted to conclude it there, and I know that there might have been more questions in the Q&A that I did not get a chance to get to, but I definitely encourage you all to submit the questions in the feedback survey that will come out when this webinar ends. And so, one of the most frustrating things about webinars is not getting to a question that could be really important. And so I will do my best to connect your questions to our speakers and really get a response back to you. And so if you could just remember to add those questions to the feedback survey, we would greatly appreciate it. As always, we want to make sure that these events are most useful to you in the audience. I think we want things to apply to your work wherever you are coming from. And so I appreciate everyone's thoughts there. And so, at this point, I really did want to start closing the webinar and re-highlight what Chrissy, Jed, and David had already talked about, the fact that we are at round 3 of this RFP, this grant process, this really great body of work that is happening in Milwaukee. It is live now. There is a landing page specifically for Zero Youth Corrections and at the Milwaukee Turners website. So definitely feel free to head over there, take a look at it. If you know anyone in the Milwaukee area doing youth justice work, definitely let them know about it if they don't know about it already. If you want to get ideas on what this work can develop into as you're brainstorming possibilities in your jurisdictions, definitely go take a look at it as well. And the last thing I wanted to mention is just that Catalyze Justice hopes to do more of these kind of webinars moving forward. So we'll definitely continue in the new year. This work in Milwaukee, this first session is really just a primer of what is, ZYC, Zero Youth Corrections work. But there are so many other things we can dive into that I would require this to be, a 50-hour webinar, which, I'm sure all of you are prepared for, but it's just not possible today. And so please, again, in your feedback surveys, let us know if this has been helpful. Let us know what else you might want to know more of. That will definitely shape what the next Milwaukee webinars would look like. Definitely other members of the team, as I mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, were not all present here. And so we want to hear from other perspectives, other points of input. And so with that, I want to thank you again, Chrissy, Jed, David. We really, really appreciate you taking the time, being here, and offering us all a sense of what has been happening in Milwaukee, not just starting in 2022, as you said, Jed, but even before that, leading up to today. And so with that, I want to thank everyone who is online now, who have stayed on until this point in time. And I hope it's been helpful. I hope you will give us some feedback, and we will see you in this work. Thank you, everyone.